In this video, we're going to check out viewer comments regarding little people in Asia. And we're going to start in the Philippines. And we're going to start with Jades P4719 4 years ago. This is so good. I love those stories. At 4646, it's really interesting because when I was traveling in the Philippines, in Asia, I met some ancient shaman people, and they told me about the fairies. For them, it has always been a reality. And what is incredible is that they told me the exact same thing and stories about them. Fairies can trap you in the jungle by some illusionary tricks and magic. And they told me several stories of some of their folks who ended up trapped for hours in some sort of loop/unusual place, like the people in these stories. That's why most of the people there always ask permission to the spirits of the forest and fairies before entering the jungle in some sacred natural settings, and make offerings and prayers to them. So this person's referring to my video on little people in Canadian settler folklore, and she's for sure talking about, or he maybe, I'm not sure, a section talking about how the fairies of Newfoundland are said to kind of make you hallucinate in the forest, become disoriented, and you'll see things that aren't there, like trees that aren't there, mountains that aren't there, things like that, and you'll get completely lost. And it sounds like the same sort of thing is supposed to happen in the Philippines, or at least Filipino folklore says that there's little people in the jungle that will trap you and make you kind of stuck in a loop, which is what some of the Newfoundland fairy stories will say, that somebody maybe in the woods will get lost, and they'll have a search party looking for him, and they'll find the guy walking around in a circle, like in a trance or something like that, and they call it a fairy loop, like he's stuck in a fairy ring. He's stuck in a fairy ring. And so the exact same thing happens in the Philippines. How creepy is that? All these stories from all over the world talking about the exact same things and attributing it to little people. So weird. Next comments, Neil Bondad, 9477, 3 years ago. I'm amazed that all of your stories, encounters, and exposure to these people are 100% the same here in our country, Philippines. These people are true, just as my father have experiences with them, and me myself had encountered them twice. One experience spooked my friend and never came back in our place. Even my daughter have seen one twice, when she was about 10 years old. Always carry salt or Bible. They are afraid of those, especially the Bible. Okay, so we know salt and the Bible are effective preventatives against little people messing with you. In Newfoundland, they say it's a piece of bread. If you carry bread with you, that can prevent you from being harassed by the little people. Next comments, Witch Tower, 3 years ago. Dwarves in the Philippines are called Dwende. There are the white and the black Dwende. Blacks are the mischievous ones, while the white ones are good or playful. I had actual experience with the whites. Interesting, so two kinds of little people, the black ones and the white ones. And we've talked before about the black little people. There's a lot of stories in First Nations folklore in Canada talking about little people with black skin, which kind of accords with this idea. And interesting, you'll note he said that they're called in the Philippines the Duende, which is the Spanish word for them in a lot of the Spanish-speaking countries in South America, in Central America, and Mexico. And that makes sense because the Philippines was a Spanish colony for hundreds of years, named after Philip II of Spain, huge king during kind of like the Spanish Golden Age in the 1500s. And if you know a little bit of Tagalog, the language they speak in the Philippines, a lot of the words are Spanish or are like Spanish influenced, very similar to Spanish. Like, for example, if you want to say hello to somebody or how are you doing, you say "Kumusta ka," which is like "Cómo estás," very similar. So not too surprising that the dwarves in the Philippines have a Spanish name. Next comments, Marianne Sawit, 1 year ago. Here in the Philippines, if things go missing or they disappear and reappear in another place, we say there is a duende in the house. Sometimes they leave small footprints on dusty floors or wet paint. They are treated as part of the household, and candy and some food are left for them. So just like little people in other traditions, this is the same in the Icelandic Huldafolk are supposed to do this, and the Newfoundland fairies are said to do this. They take your things. They take weird little things from your house, and you don't see them for maybe years. Then they reappear in some weird place that you for sure didn't put them. And just like the Newfoundland fairies, you're supposed to leave food for them, she says. And then one thing she adds here is that they leave small footprints on dusty floors or wet paint. That reminds me a little bit of, in the Great Sandhills, I think the Cree said that you could, this is in southwest Saskatchewan, the Plains Cree said that I think you could see tiny little footprints in the sand that are supposed to be little people. And now we're on to Indonesia. First comments from Vera Halim, 9658, 4 years ago. In Indonesia, we also have the story of the little people who live in the forest and like to confuse people who are lost in the wilderness. One of my colleagues told me once that her daughter suddenly went missing while playing with her friends. They lived on a big palm plantation, and no one could find her after searching for her all day long. Fortunately, the next morning, somehow she was found among the bushes in front of her house, and she told her parents that while she was playing, someone, possibly a woman if I'm not mistaken, approached her and led her somewhere into the plantation, and made her sit under a big tree, providing her with food and water that luckily she didn't touch at all. For although that food might appear to be just any other harmless food, it is actually earthworms, maggots, and things like that. Wow, so very similar to the old fairy stories from Newfoundland which come from Ireland and England. Confusing people who are lost in the woods, making them more lost, and stealing his daughter. Now, I wonder if, to make this really similar to Newfoundland folklore, if his daughter had been discovered with some sort of mental or physical problem afterwards, which is what happens very frequently in Newfoundland fairy stories. That would be extra weird. But she doesn't say anything about that. And the detail of this thing providing her with food and water that she didn't touch is also like some of the Newfoundland stories. They say that people who are lost in the woods, the fairies will try to give you food, they'll offer you food, and if you take it, then you're really stuck in their land, you can't get out of fairyland. But she's saying the reason that you shouldn't touch the food is because it's actually earthworms, maggots, and things like that. Very interesting. Next comments, Audie Chan, 96, 3 years ago. We call the little elves living in the woods as Bunian. They even have their own community, living in their own villages in their own dimension parallel to ours. They're synonymous to one of the many kinds of jinns, although they're mostly harmless unless you trespass their territory or offend them somehow. Hikers who go off trail and get lost without a trace are usually victims of Bunians, hiding them from the human dimension. Victims who are finally returned to our dimension are often said that they experienced a different time flow than ours. Example, they went lost for 3 months, but claimed they felt it had only been 3 days since they were lost. If you went into the woods, be mindful of your behavior. They don't like noisy crowds, destructive/inappropriate acts, and don't just piss on some random trees instead of the river. And don't challenge them, mock them, or call them out. They're quick to anger. Remember, the woods are their territory, and you're passing through their ancient lands. You're far from home, and just like coming into another people's house, the last thing you should do is be a disrespectful fellow. Wow, okay, so he says they're jinns, which is like the Islamic, like genies, which kind of sound like demons or something, like powerful spirits that are usually not very friendly. And I remember looking up Bunian when I was kind of collecting these stories, and it's Indonesian, from Borneo, Malaysia, and other parts of Indonesia. And that makes sense saying jinns because Indonesia and Malaysia are Muslim countries, mostly. So just like other stories we've covered, people who get lost in the woods, they attribute that to Bunians messing with them and hiding them from the human dimension. That's the first time I've heard anybody explicitly say that. In the fairy stories, they say they take you to fairyland, that's what they say, which kind of sounds like, a dimension that's different from ours. And really interesting, he says that people who get taken by these Bunians, they perceive time differently, which is just the same as some Iroquois and Little People stories I've covered. I'll put a link to my video on that in the description. But there are stories of people getting, not kidnapped by little people, but there's stories of, like, they get invited into their home in a rock somewhere or in a cliff or something, and they'll go in there and they'll learn a bunch of interesting skills and knowledge, and then they'll go back to their own people, and for them it seemed like a little while, but they come out and they're really old, and like maybe, 30 years had passed since they were in that cave. Kind of a Rip Van Winkle story. There's one in particular I'm thinking of. It's an Iroquoian story. You'll find it in that video if you want to watch it. And then he says they don't like noisy crowds, destructive, inappropriate acts, and don't just. So then he says don't be disrespectful in the woods, which reminds me a little bit of. There's an old story from. It's a Cree story, like either a Woods Cree or a Rock Cree story, from I think northern Manitoba, and they were saying that the little people. So I guess little people encounters were more common in the past, but the little people had left, and they said it was because the white man had came. And they didn't like how he would build, buildings with wood, cutting down trees and things like that. He didn't like the industry of the white man. That's what made them go away. So kind of a similar message here. Little people of Indonesia don't like big crowds, big cities, and destructive acts, which I imagine industrial pursuits like maybe logging or mining would be considered. And we've got another one here from Primo Bendavides, 833, 3 years ago. Grew up Maya roots, Native American. These little people have always existed. Never had any personal experience with the little people when growing up. Heard legends of duendes. Later served in the military for over 20 years. I landed on Clark AFB right at 0001 a.m., June 4th, 1991, from Diego Garcia, Bayot. Mount Pinatubo had just cracked open and allowed pent-up, highly pressurized gas to vent into the sky, creating lightning and shook the ground beneath me. I was PCSing from sea duty on a guided missile destroyer to shore duty NEC 0000 anywhere Guam. I apologize, I don't know what any of these acronyms mean. Twilight Tour. I still had my sea legs. My orders were immediately cancelled. The Air Force informed me that I had to help get all civilians out of Clark AFB. We completed the mission on June 11th, 1991. As far as I could tell, I was the only one that spent the night on Clark AFB on June 11th, 1991. Per my new orders, I was to take the bus from Clark AFB to Manila International Airport on June 12th, 1991. I arose at 0600. I got ready and did my 3-mile run. I took a shower, got ready, and headed out to the base gate to the bus stop. The bus was to pick me up at 10 a.m. What if the bus does not show up? Anyway, I looked at how empty Angeles City looked now. I had a couple of hours till my scheduled bus. I decided to take a walk into Angeles City. All was empty. There was no one around. The fruit stands all had fruit still on display. The open bars all still had cold beer. San Miguel still on ice. I'm sorry, this must be in the Philippines. I probably put this in the wrong category. I grabbed a beer, opened it. I suddenly caught a glimpse of some people walking down the middle of the road. Their stature were less than 2 feet tall. I could tell that they were a mom and a pop and 2 little ones, maybe teens. The male carried a spear. I did not dare make direct eye contact, and likewise they did not make direct eye contact with me. My estimate is that these creatures were not Negritos or any of the known Malay natives of the Philippines. Negritos are darker in skin color and have really curly hair. Malay or Malaysian are more like Indonesians. These people were little people, brown-skinned, black, coarse hair. They appeared to be more concerned with their survival, if and when Mount Pinatubo erupted. The kids, both male, sampled some of the apples and oranges and spat it out. They did like the pineapple, 5-finger, mango, papaya, and took some. The only thing that I can compare them to is a video that plays in YouTube regarding the people on a moped encountering a being running away carrying a spear. Homo floresiensis, a species of tiny human discovered on the Indonesian island of Flores. They are not hobbits, nor do they resemble any type of chimp or ape. They are just smaller people. BT sworn to defend the U.S. Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Out. Wow, that's weird. So a deserted city in the Philippines somewhere, because a volcano was about to erupt. And it sounds like this isn't like a story of like preternatural little people. This is a story of some very small humans, like a tribe of really tiny humans, pygmies, kind of living, I guess, in the jungle and then coming into the city when it's deserted. If you enjoy these unpolished videos of mine, you might be interested in my new channel, the Gary Mangiacopra Archive. On that channel, I go through the files of the late, great Gary Mangiacopra, one of the most prolific Fortean archivists in the world, who spent his life collecting material on unexplained phenomena. Don't let the thumbnails turn you off. There's no AI in these videos. It's just me going through the archives, reading the most interesting stories. If you'd like to check it out, please click the link in the description. And another one is from Kathy Prendergast, CU5CI 2 years ago. There is a legend on the Indonesian island of Sumatra of a creature called orang pendek, which literally means small person or short person. It's usually described as covered with hair and very primitive looking, like a miniature version of Sasquatch. It's always described as very shy and frightened of people, and usually spotted from a distance. Sometimes I wonder if all these stories of little people stem from human beings having once coexisted with other bipedal hominids. Little creatures like Australopithecus afarensis, whose fossils have been found in Africa. The male adults of that species are believed to have been only about 4 feet tall. We've always assumed all species like that were no longer around by the time our species appeared, but maybe they still were. Humans saw them, and because they seemed so different, so strange and mysterious, they told stories about them, and often ascribed to them supernatural powers. So the idea that the orang pendek, which is a legendary hairy little person of North Sumatra, is a cultural memory of something like Australopithecus afarensis, a primitive human. Now we're into Malaysia. This comment's from Andreas James, 1956, 3 years ago. Thanks for bringing light to the topic of universal similarities in folktales. You're onto something here, and there's something to it. You posted a video before about goblins, fairies, and little people of the forest. Way over in Borneo, we have our own folktales about such beings. Little people of the forest that can help as well as be mischievous. So little people on Borneo, which is a huge island, it's shared by Indonesia, Malaysia, and then there's a little place on it that has its own country. I can't remember what it's called, but like a super religious Muslim country there. I can't remember the name. And then he has another comment here from 3 years ago. In Malaysia, Southeast Asia, we have tales about this too. They say these lost travelers are whisked away by the orang Bunian, fairy people, into their realm to live among them. So another mention of the orang Bunian, fairy people of the forest in Indonesia, Malaysia. And now we're into India. This comment's from Neil Thompson, 9505, 5 years ago. In India, there are entire cities under some temples. Interestingly enough, the people are encouraged to pour water over a lingam for blessings. The water that runs off this shrine flows down into these cities, and the amount of water that gets poured over the lingam on a daily basis should be enough to support a small community. On top of all this, the cities under the temple are all built for small people. I was told that these temples were built due to the fact that when ancient India was expanding, and they cut into the jungle to expand, the builders would happen across these small people and their communities, and then they would make arrangements to be able to accommodate these small people, and the small people would also sometimes help with the construction. This is why there is sometimes some unexplainable architecture. These small people would use their technology to help the humans to melt and mold rock, as well as to help carve some, if not most, of the stonework. Apparently, they were very good at this. Wow, that's interesting. I didn't know that. So underneath the temples in India are like little underground cities built for small people. And then they have the legend that they encountered them in the woods when they were expanding their empire. Interesting. And last one here is from Nepal. From Neo Anderson 1 year ago. In Nepal, we have what we refer to as khak. They're allegedly small humanoid creatures who are supposedly said to be residing in dark shaded places near neighborhoods. There is a gray one and a darker shade one. Supposedly, if you managed to catch the gray one, you could ask it for something you wanted and it could fulfill you. So another mention of not white, but he says gray and then a darker one, which kind of reminds you of what somebody was saying in the Philippines with a white dwarf and a black dwarf. Okay, so those are the end of the Asian stories, and the stories we have left are stories from the United States and stories which don't really have a specified location, which are all located in the home or on a rural property. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.